Hey everybody, this is Dr. Hines. I am doing a follow-up like I said I would do. It's about 2:30 on Tuesday and I am made myself a cup of coffee because if you were at all like me over the weekend, you your kids stayed up too late and they were too hard to get up this morning and you're exhausted. So I'm trying to recover from that to make it through to our class this evening. So I'm looking forward to being with you then, both at 6 and 7 p.m. to share some wonderful materials that you have been using with high ability students. So really the purpose of why I am videoing today is just to kind of touch base with you about your discussion last week on differentiation. So we started that strand, the strand 2 on differentiation that will be kind of simultaneous to everything else that we do in our class this semester. So every week we will be focusing on something a little bit different. We'll look at, we're just getting started kind of these first few weeks with the readings on differentiation, but we'll look at things like diversity, we'll look at things like curriculum, we'll look at things like assessment, we'll look at things like grading. What does that look like in a differentiated classroom? So the purpose of that strand is just to present you with some different kind of concepts and elements about differentiation and how to continue to utilize that, apply that in your classroom. So, that was what I wanted to kind of share with you today are some of the things that people brought up in discussion that I thought were particularly interesting or were duplicated throughout that many people said. So, I think that some of the things that I will say in my reflection upon your reflections would be one of the things that I find in working with teachers both in our class, as I teach this class every fall, but also in working with teachers in schools, whether it's through a consultantship or whatnot, is that everybody kind of thinks they know what differentiation is, but that's so different to every person. And of course that's particularly interesting because everybody's had a different experience as a student, as a teacher, length of time teaching, different kinds of innovations and initiatives that have been required of them. So, likewise, just as I read all of your posts, your understandings about differentiation are very varied. And I really appreciated the honesty of many people who just said, I thought I knew what it was, but now I'm really confused. So that's actually a good place to be, I feel like, for us in this course, because you're willing to be open to reconceptualizing your understanding of differentiation. And it was apparent to me that some of you all, whether it's in your undergraduate work or in some kind of professional development, have had some really good training, and other people some not so good training, and some people who said, all of a sudden I was just required to do it, but I've never really understood about it. So hopefully by the end of this course you'll have more of an understanding about what differentiated instruction means and what we hope for that to look like in its application in our classrooms. So, several of you, I think Claire, I started there with our reviewing the initial posts, talked about it being a buzzword and kind of an infatuation. And I do think that happened several years ago. I think all of a sudden this once idea that was used in gifted education all of a sudden went, to the masses, went to everybody. And that's a argument that I think people had in their posts this week is this just for gifted kids? Is this for all kids? And I think that Jennifer Jolly presents some of that information in the reading that I asked you all to do, talking about how this approach became very watered down. So I purposefully presented that to you to get you thinking about who is differentiation for. This is a course that works towards an endorsement in gifted education so that you all better understand how to prepare for and use different methods and materials for high ability students. Me personally, I do think differentiation is for all students. Each of you probably has a different take on that. I do think that we have lost some of the essence of what differentiation should be because of its mass, push to all teachers and all places and all things. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, what I think has happened is really we've lost a deep understanding about what it should look like. But I do think that some of the points people made were really important. I saw many of you talking about the three ways, there are the three levels of learning in your classrooms, and how do you try to provide things for kids that are struggling, kids that are on level, and kids that are advanced. And I think that is one approach. That is what we would call a tiered lesson or a tiered assignment, where you've given different levels to all reach the same destination. But that's just one strategy. I think that's something that I notice across groups of teachers, is that people think differentiation is this bag of strategies, because there are a lot of strategies, right? But that's not what differentiation is. Differentiation, in its essence, is a whole way of thinking about teaching and learning. It's a philosophy. It's not just a group of strategies. Reading some of your posts today made me think to point you towards that section in Strand 2 that I have some different charts and visuals that I think are helpful. This is one of them that I have. This is just a flow chart of differentiation or differentiated instruction. Kind of gives that definition, like I asked you all, a response to learners' needs that's guided by the principles of differentiation, which are respectful tasks, flexible grouping, and ongoing assessment. And the different ways teachers can differentiate. They can modify the content, the process, or the product, and they can modify those things according to student readiness, interest, or learning profile. Oftentimes we think that differentiation is only for ability. It's only to group kids of like ability. And so that was one of the things I wanted to point out after reading through your posts, is that we can also differentiate based upon what kids are interested in or how they learn, or a combination of any of those things, as well as what you differentiate. You definitely differentiate the content, but you can also differentiate how they do things and actually what they create. What are those products? So getting down to the bottom of this flow chart, you see those strategies that I was just mentioning earlier. And each of you, one of the assignments for this course, without going too much into detail about what it's going to be like, because it's more far in the semester, you will have to choose a strategy like the ones listed below here. So whether you pick a tiered lesson, or you pick a contract, or you pick an independent study, or you pick an interest center or curriculum compacting, there's lots of different ways that you can differentiate. There are also, I didn't pull it up here to share with you, but there's a great chart in there that talks about low prep and high prep strategies. So, I would encourage you to check that out and even begin looking at some of those low prep. Just a matter of you're giving kids choices in books. That's a way to differentiate both for ability, if you're having kids that you've assessed on different levels and you're pairing them with different books, or if it's by interest, where students have certain interests in books and you're pairing with them based on that. So that's a great chart to look at. I do think that and several of you mentioned your frustration with differentiation because of some of these things I've already mentioned, that it's expected of you, that it's not something that you're given a lot of information on, or, those of you in Georgia know that differentiation is one of the lines on your on the TEKS, what you're evaluated on. And so it's pertinent, it's important, and there's a reason for it being on there. What I want us to discover this term is kind of behind that. What is it that differentiation is, and why is it important, and why should we be doing it? Some of the other things that I read I thought were important, I wanted to point out. People talked about choice. So lots of times people say, well, I'm differentiating, I'm giving kids choices. Well, choices doesn't really equal differentiation. That is something that you can use when you're trying to give kids options for demonstrating their learning through a product, whether it's a learning profile or the different ways for which they'll create that product. But choices in and of themselves are not differentiation, and many of you recognize that, but that's kind of another myth that people have. I think that several of you mentioned engagement. And that's one thing that with the differentiated instruction plans, I always get so much back from you all in your reflections upon doing that assignment, is that the kids were so engaged. But engagement is only part of it. We also have to make sure that we are working with students' understandings about whatever it is that they're learning. I think another thing that's really important to talk about is it's important to know what you're differentiating, and that if you don't have a high quality curriculum, or you don't have a deep understanding of what it is that you're teaching about, that really if you begin to try to do some of these things with differentiation, it just becomes, you're just differentiating fluff if you're not really basing it on something that's well conceived. So it's important, I think, to also understand the role of a strong curriculum. Just looking at all my notes here that I wanted to mention. I think another principle that's really important to talk about is assessment. And I think that's, again, another misunderstanding about differentiation, is that you make decisions for learning tasks and activities based upon what you know with students. And somebody mentioned that being data-driven. Well, I agree with probably most of you that data-driven has gotten way out of control, but nonetheless, the question is, what is the data? So sometimes that is specific testing information. It might be classroom test feedback. It might be tests that they took, high stakes testing that they had taken the year before, but it also can be other pieces of information, your observations as a teacher, conversations that you've had with children, inventories or surveys that you've given them that you're getting things back from them. What are they interested in? How do they learn best? Even feedback from parents and former teachers. Data can come in a lot of different ways, and so it's important to try to figure out a way to capture that, because the better that you know your students, the better you're going to be at creating differentiated assignments and instruction, knowing how to put kids in different kinds of flexible groups that they can move in and out of. So I would encourage you to continue to think about, and we'll, in a few weeks, talk about assessment as a theme in differentiation, and how it really is the basis for what you do. We kind of get all excited about looking down here and using some of these strategies, but we can't really use those things until we have the information in front of us to know what to change. So a lot of people talked about the time that it takes to do differentiated instruction or planning. Yes, it does. But what I always kind of tell people is, I wouldn't expect for you to be differentiating, especially if you're a new teacher, every single thing, every day, every hour, all year long. That's why we call teaching an art, is because it develops over time. And so, just like that, differentiation is something that you will become more comfortable with the more that you develop those kinds of techniques and systems and management of that kind of a classroom, and you'll become more comfortable with it, and it will become more and more a part of what you do, and less time to plan. But yes, as you begin and try each new step, that will take some time and planning. But I always kind of encourage people to think about it like baby steps, just one little step at a time, adding to your repertoire of what you do. Let's see. A couple of people talked about really understanding. I think Aaron mentioned this. is that she felt like she has a really good understanding, just kind of textbook understanding of differentiation, but it's been very different in its implementation as she's been in her first years of teaching. And I'm sure many people can identify with that understanding it and doing it those are two different things. And again, like I was just saying, it's something that we have to continue to refine and revisit. It's more than that toolbox of strategies. It's figuring out how to make learning as equitable and excellent as possible. That was something that we saw Dr. Tomlinson talk a lot about in one of our readings, was that bringing that equity and excellence to the table, that it would not be enough to just say, okay, we're providing an opportunity for all students, but we have to not expect the same for everyone, that we give high expectations for wherever a learner is in order to promote excellence. Let's see. There was a couple of people talked about common assessments and how problematic that was, and I really agree with you. I think that, if we're wanting to do different things with different kids, and then at the end of the day we have to do these common assessments, that kind of runs in the face of what we're trying to do. And so I don't have an answer for that because, I'm not your principals and I'm not your superintendents, and I'm not making those rules. But I think that we can look beyond that. Sometimes we just have to do what has to be done, but do the best that we can to work around those things, to know what to do what we think is best for students. And so I think the more further that you get into your teaching years, the more comfortable you become with that. Sorry, just taking a pause at some of these notes that I have. A couple other things that I wanted to, somebody mentioned pacing, and I just wanted to point out that I thought pacing is just kind of one of the things that we can look at when we're talking about a differentiated classroom. This is one of the graphics that I have in Strand 2. It's called the equalizer. So thinking about the different ways that we can change, lessen, or strengthen things in the teaching and learning experiences that we design. Some of you that would be my age mates will remember what an equalizer is, like the electronic equalizer that changes the different parts of sound or what comes through a stereo. We don't have a lot of these anymore, but the idea is that you can take some of these different items and you can change that little sliding to more or less. So when we're thinking about the experiences that we're designing, are we going to make them really concrete? Are we going to kind of change the level to more abstract? And where are the children in that group that we've created needing that? Do they need something a little more concrete? Do they need something more abstract, or something kind of in the middle? Complexity. Is this something that needs to be very simple, or are these students really wanting and needing more complex material? Are students able to, do they need to really have very small leaps in their understanding, or are they able to really take a great leap? So thinking about some of these different things as you're designing differentiated tasks for your students. And then this is just a last one that I thought that was really good, and I think it aligns pretty well with the reading about the 3 different teachers. I think that I love that reading because it really gives you a sense of like, okay, this is not what differentiated instruction looks like. Well, yeah, this sounds like it. Oh, but maybe it's missing some elements. And here's what it really looks like. So I think the more that we can see it in action, the better we understand it and the better we're able to build it in. So overall, I just wanted to say I think that you all have got some really great beginning definitions and understandings about what differentiation is. I hope that the things that we'll do this semester and through your discussions and readings, you will enhance your understanding. Our culminating activity will be the largest assignment for this course, which is to take in data, analyze, and develop a lesson for a group of students. That's the first part of the assignment. Then you will deliver the lesson, and then report back on what happened in the lesson and your reflections on that. So we will be well prepared to do that by the time it comes due, which will be more at the end of October and in November. But right now we're just continuing to build our understanding and enrich what we know about differentiated instruction. So I think that's all I have. Thank you for a great discussion. I'm excited that you all will be getting into your small groups this week, and we will see how that goes. Please feel free to access Harun or myself if you need help. Thanks, everybody.